So in part one of this video, we took my old pedalboard apart and did the planning for my new pedalboard build. Now, we're going to start putting that build together. So I mentioned I was putting a new power supply on, which is going to be this thing, the Voodoo Labs Pedal Power 3. Now this is something that I did by myself. I bought this from the guys that distribute Voodoo Labs in the UK, which is a company called Westside Distribution. Westside have actually hooked me up with this pedal train like 3 years ago. So there was an original pedalboard build about 3 years ago on the channel where they originally gave me this board, and they've also provided me with the MXR Joshua as well. So that was a separate transaction. That wasn't actually for this video. In fact, none of that stuff was actually provided to me for this video. They're just things they have provided me in the past. So I'm going to be putting this power supply on. I did buy this power supply off them with the intention of doing this build though. So this is going to be going on today. As part of this build, I'm also renewing my cables. Now, you may have seen a recent video I made on Pedal Patch Cables, which is a company owned by a friend of mine whose name is Phil. And Phil very, very kindly sent me a load of cables and connectors to use for the board build. So Phil isn't sponsoring the video, but he has provided me with all the cable that I need, as well as all the connectors that I'm going to need to put this together as well. So I'm going to be using Pedal Patch cables. These are solderless cables and they're super easy to put together. There's a video linked in the top corner of this video where I show you just how easy it is to put one of these things together as well. Underneath the board, I'm also going to be putting a couple of these Engel PowerTap portable units as well, which I'm going to be connecting to outputs of Voodoo Labs and just using these as like additional power distribution as well, because this has 8 outputs and these have 2 outputs each, and these are great for running daisy chains off as well. So I'm going to be using these just to kind of make the power go that little bit further as well. So the first thing I need to do is I need to fit this to the underside of the board. Now, when you first turn a pedal train over, these don't actually fit because the connections for the outputs don't actually line up with the gap on the back of the pedal train like that. They actually end up, when it flush to the board, they actually end up like that, which means I can't plug it in. So what I need is I need a bracket. So they actually make these pedal train brackets. I bought this recently from the guys at Andertons. And what this does is this allows me to mount my pedal power to the board and it kind of floats. These are really easy to fit. All you need to do is take 2 screws out of each side of the pedal power, and then the bracket goes over those screw holes, and then the screws hold the bracket in place. Once you've taken those screws out, you put the bracket over like this, line up the screw holes, and then put the screws back through, and then that will just hold the pedal power against the pedal train. We do have to drill some holes for this as well, which we'll do in a moment. Just repeat the process on the other side. 2 screws out, bracket goes on, 2 screws go back in. So there you go, that is done. Those are mounted. So I just need to pick where I want this to go, and then I have to drill some holes here, and then also on the back rail here and here, and that will hold my power supply in place. So my previous power supply was off center like this, which I think I will probably also do with this one, but I'm going to bring it in a little bit like so, just so I've got a little bit of room here for some cable routing, but I think this is probably where I'm going to put it. So you need a drill for this. Now, what I always do when I do stuff like this is I use the drill just to mark the points, just so I know where they're going to be, because what I don't want to do is try and drill the holes while holding this steady. I always feel it's much easier to just mark them this way, because then you kind of know where your drill holes are going to be. That one needs to be bent outward slightly. You may find that you have to bend the end of these a little bit just to kind of get them to fit to your board, because depending on which type of pedal train you're using, some of the angles might be slightly different. So that is about right. So I'm just going to start drilling now and hope for the best. What I have done in the past, and probably will happen today, is I've drilled this previously, as you can see, for another power supply mounting and got it wrong. So these will actually probably end up in the wrong place as well, but that's part of the fun of building a board. So in theory, that should now fit where I've drilled the holes, and that is looking pretty promising. I think I've actually done that right. So now I need to get the bag of screws that comes with it and mount the power supply. So there we go, we are mounted. Now the cool thing with the mounting brackets for the Voodoo Labs stuff is that it actually leaves some space here above the pedal power supply. So I can actually run some cables here as well for cable running neatness. But also the way I've put this is I put it just off center. So I've got this little channel here as well, so I can run some cables in there. That's really useful. And then obviously I can access the power from the back like so. So now that that's on, I can start to basically fit the pedals to the board in the way they're going to be fitted, and then we can start making some patch cables. So I'm just going to put them back on where you've already seen them, and then like I said, some of the positions may slightly change depending on how long the cables are and what we need to do in that sense, but this is roughly where they're going to be. Some of these pedals have never been on a board before, so I'm going to put some Velcro on them. So like this June 60, I've taken the rubber feet off the bottom. I'm just going to get some Velcro on the back of this thing. When you're putting pedals on for placeholder positions, you always have to remember to leave some space for where the cables are going to go, because I could put these two right next to each other, but then I can't plug it in. A useful thing you can do is if you're using something like this kit that I'm using, you can actually use the jack plugs as a spacer. So I know if this needs to be at least that far away from this pedal, because that is how big the plug is. So as long as I'm that far away, that will work. I'm also going to be using some of these pedal risers. These are from a company called Diago. I've had these for probably like 15 years, and that company doesn't actually exist anymore. But the pedal risers are basically just bits of bent metal with some Velcro on them. And the whole point is you can put them on the board and raise other pedals up. Pedal Train do have their own official pedal risers, but I've literally had these ones for such a long time and I've always used them. These are going to go here because the Origin Effects Halcyon Gold and the tuner are going to live on these. And there's going to be some stuff behind it that I don't need access to. So it doesn't really matter if there's things that I can't click, because they're just pedals that are going to be always on. But with these two being slightly raised, I can actually access them during the show as well. Makes it that little bit easier to press the buttons. So I might have a bit of a tricky time mounting this Origin Effects pedal to the board, because there are some screws underneath that are actually raised above the flat bottom of the pedal. So that might cause some issues. I didn't realize that until now. I'm hoping that it won't, but historically anything that sticks out at the bottom of the pedal can sometimes make sticking it to a board a little bit tricky. So that's not terrible, but it's not ideal. I might need to find a thicker Velcro for that one at some point in the future. The detox is going to go behind like this, and then the germanium tumnus is going to go into the top corner, and my trusty Hall of Fame, that's going to go in there. I'm not too worried about that kind of flopping around at the moment, because the patch cables will kind of hold that in place when they're done. All right, so there's my layout done. Power supply's mounted. Now I need to make some patch cables. So I'm going to be using all the pedal patch stuff like I mentioned. To start with, you need cable length, 2 of the connectors, and Phil also has these cool little cable cutting tools which are essential. The only other thing you need is a screwdriver. So the first thing I need to do is I need to cable my wah pedal, which is going to be the start of my chain, to my tuner. So this is going to be actually quite a short cable. It's going to go from here to here. So I need to make sure that my sockets are going to fit. So that one's okay because it's actually above that pedal. And I need to make sure that this socket here is going to fit as well, which it does perfectly. And then I need to just decide how long I want my cable. The cable cutting tool is a really cool thing. It's worth getting your hands on rather than using a typical set of pliers or wire cutters, because the way this works is it actually doesn't crush the cable, it actually keeps the cable circular, so it actually maintains the structural integrity of what you're doing. So all I need here actually is like, well, not much at all, maybe like that much cable. So I'm going to start with that. I suspect at some point I'm going to make some big mistakes with this, but as you do it, you just want to roll this around until it does that. Really easy. That's how quick it was to cut the cable. And to make these cables even quicker, the cable itself has a little screw on there. Undo that screw. And it's very important you do not lose that screw, so put that to one side. Take the back off like this, put that down somewhere safe. Inside here is a pin. The core of this needs to go onto that pin, so you just put it in like that and push. And when you push it in, it'll feel quite sturdy like that. There's a video in the top corner of this, like I said, where I go into more detail about this. Now I want these to be right angle connections, so I'm going to bend that down like so. Get my cap, put my cap back on, make sure I line up that screw hole. Get that screw that I put to one side, put that in, and screw it in. When you're making patch cables, I would always recommend testing them as you go along. I'm not going to do that today, just because I'm just going to test. When you're making patch cables, I would always recommend testing them as you go along as well. There is nothing worse than getting to the end of a pedal board build and realizing there's a problem somewhere, but not knowing where that problem is. That is a real time hog. I've done it before. I've made an entire board's worth of cables, gotten to the end of the board, and then you have to go through every cable one by one to troubleshoot where there's a problem. If you test them at this stage as you're going, you actually eliminate the need to troubleshoot the board later on, because if you run into a problem cable, you know about it before you've cabled it into your entire rig. So as you go, make sure you test the cables to make sure they're working. You can either test them just by plugging them in, or you can use an electrical multimeter if you have one. Okay, so there's cable number one done. That is going to connect my wah to my tuner. Now the whole idea behind shorter cables for me is just for the overall board neatness. So I'm going to make some short cables here just to connect things. So I want this to be as neat as possible with minimal kind of running underneath. I was previously using some really long patch cables and there was quite messy runs underneath. So this one I want to keep as sleek as possible. So now I'm going to make all of the other cables for this board. I'm not going to bore you by making you sit through me making loads of different patch cables. So the next time you see this, it will be cabled up, ready for the power. And just like that, it is done. Here is the finished result. So everything's been cabled in. I've made all of the patch cables to size, basically keeping them as short as possible for, you know, the least amount of distance the signal has to travel, and everything has been power cabled in as well. So underneath the board, it's a little bit messier than I wanted, but you know, no one's going to see this bit, so that's fine. Everything is running off the Voodoo Labs Pedal Power 3. You can see here I've got the two Engel Power Tap portables. One of them is running a daisy chain which is covering all of my drive pedals. The reason for that is drive pedals are very low current draw. These things can take a 9-volt in and actually push out 800 milliamps of current. So that is basically just acting as a distributor for my drive pedals. And then this one is covering, I think, my detox EQ and the wah pedal, I think. And then everything else is running off this. Then I've also got a current doubler cable, which is using two outputs, which is powering my HX Stomp XL. So that is the underside of the board. That is the top side of the board. So the only thing left to do now is for me to plug this in, make sure it all works, fix any problems that have happened during the build process. Then we're going to come back to video number 3, where I'm going to show you all of the tones from this thing. Thank you guys so much for watching part 2. I hope you've enjoyed this little pedal board build series up till now. Let me know down below in the comments what you're thinking of this video series so far. And don't forget to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button if you're new here. And I'll see you guys in part 3. Thank you so much as always.